Well, the time has come. There is 1,000 robots outside who are about to replace us. You've probably heard that over and over and over again and have wondered to yourself, what does that actually mean? And when people say these things, when they talk about replacing human capital with functional technical capital, they talk about artificial intelligence. And that's what we're going to talk about today. But before we do, as I always do, I want to start with our mission, which is to advance humanity by solving the world's hardest problems. There are a group of people in Silicon Valley right now that believe the most important things to spend our time on is the advancement of human capital, the eradication of disease, solutions to global climate change, and other really difficult things that are non-obvious. And the reason we come to that conclusion is because we as an organization are comprised by and amongst people who have otherwise helped build some of the most indelible and well-known technology companies that we all use every day. And it's through that lens that we started presenting at IRIS-OWN in 2016. And we started with a really non-obvious presentation of an idea around being long Amazon. And as it turned out, it's been compounding every year by about 54%. A few months later, we were asked to speak at IRIS-OWN on the West Coast. And we picked another really interesting company with a non-obvious thesis, Workday. And that has been compounding by about 26% a year. And last year, I was here on this stage and I had the opportunity to talk about our modern Edison, a gentleman named Elon Musk running a business named Tesla, who we thought could be creating a really incredible transformation in energy and a real impact in dent in climate change. Now, that has been off to not as blistering of a start, but we still believe. The point is that our IRIS-OWN basket has compounded on average by about 36% a year, and it's with that lens that we now start to talk about something that we think creates a really interesting disruptive company that is really worth considering for 2018. But before I do that, I want to unpack the thing that we all probably are asking ourselves. When you hear the buzzword artificial intelligence, what is it? What is it that all these people are talking about? Let's start with some very, very basics. When people talk about AI, they're talking about two, and only two, very unique but overlapping concepts. The first is the idea of learning. So how do we use computers to replicate how the human mind learns? And the second is inferring and inference, or how do we observe things in real life once we've been trained and then make a prediction that's accurate? And how do we use computers to do the same thing? And what we've done in computer science is unpack these two problems and then allocate computers and allocate resources and really smart people to try to solve them in interesting ways. So how does learning work? Learning, much like the human mind, works in a very simple idea, which is you take enormous amounts of data, you train your mind, or in this case, you train a computer using an algorithm, and out of that comes a model that describes everything you've seen in the past. And why that's useful is then you can use that model in real time, so that when you encounter the next dog or cat, once you've been trained to know what a dog looks like, you can identify that image with extreme high precision. So inference is you take all of those observations in real time and you apply this model and you make predictions. So why is artificial intelligence so interesting? Why do people think it's transformational? And it's this one very simple idea, which is that it creates a positive feedback loop in how we as humans can make better and better decisions. And the way that works is that once you use data and you train computers to think about what it is, and they understand what it is, then they can predict the new thing, and then you send that result back into the system, and all of a sudden your knowledge starts to compound. Your accuracy compounds. Your ability to predict things intelligently compound. And then as you can imagine, it also allows you to do those things, these very difficult things, cheaper, faster, and better. This is at the crux of why everybody is focused on this problem. So for example, if you took trillions of search queries of what every human in the world was searching for, and you trained a model, and you created a product around it, it would be called Google. And we've all had this experience when we type in one or two letters into Google and it completes a search term, and you think to yourself, how did they know? Well, they knew because a computer helped them guess. And that guess was actually not a guess, it was a very accurate prediction. And these predictions are going to get more and more accurate over time. Imagine if you took trillions and trillions of photos, and you identified each one as a dog, as a cat, as a human, a beach, a mountain, a lake. What would you be able to do? Well, if you used iPhoto, or if you used Google Photos or Facebook, you could identify faces. You could do interesting things like search for all the times you've been to a beach where the computers understand what beaches are. How does that happen? Again, it's artificial intelligence. These are models that have been trained over long periods of time. And then finally, think about how you could do interesting things if you took a car and you put sensors all around it. Sensors that told you what was in front of you, what was behind you, your tire pressure, where you were, how fast you were going, the weather, etc., etc. You could probably create a really intelligent autopiloting system. And we see that now in the wild with companies like Tesla and Google. The point is that everybody in Silicon Valley has now come to a really important decision point. The last 20 years of value creation in Silicon Valley have been bound by this idea that there are these waves. And in the late 90s and early 2000s, we went through this first transformation, where in order to raise capital, and frankly, when you think about where value creation existed, it was this idea that you no longer were a computer company, but you were an internet company. And then in 2008, when Steve Jobs introduced the iPhone, something really interesting happened, which was the next wave started, which was this idea that now it didn't matter whether you were an internet company, like Google or Facebook. It mattered whether you were a mobile company, like Uber and Snapchat. But now what I would tell you is that this third wave is upon us. And in this third wave, it's really critical to understand what AI is, what it can do, what it can't do, and who is actually positioned to create incredible amounts of value over the next 10 to 20 years. And so it's when we internalize the importance of this idea that we did what we always do, which is take a step back and create a logical framework to understand how value gets created. And in this case, we created a really simple level of building blocks that we called the AI stack. And it's using this model, you can organize who does what and where we think real value is going to get created in the past, today, and more importantly for our pick coming up in the future. So there are these four really important areas, so let's just talk about them really quickly. The first is this idea of compute. The reality is that artificial intelligence, at the end of the day, is a lot of math, specifically in linear algebra. And as it turns out, when you unpack it, companies like Intel, making things like CPUs, are terrible at the kind of math that AI needs. It turned out that another product that already existed at the time, called a GPU, a graphic processing unit, was great at linear algebra, largely made by a company many of you have heard of called NVIDIA. And it turned out that GPUs were 10 times to 100 times more performant than a CPU. And it probably explains why NVIDIA has run as much as it has. But that's not the ending point. In fact, what companies like Google found out was that you could actually make a custom chip by yourself that was even better than a GPU. And they created something called a TPU, which is 2 to 10 times better. But at the end of the day, the compute layer has been dominated by two vendors, NVIDIA and Google. A lot of the value has been created, but we think it's an interesting building block for where we're going. So on top of all of this compute, we have infrastructure. What does that mean? Well, artificial intelligence requires a different kind of compute infrastructure. It's not just about storage. It's not just about CPUs. But what it is about GPUs. It's about the ability to pipeline enormous amounts of data very quickly. And it's not the ability to do it on-premise. It must exist in the cloud because of the complexity of what's happening. So the simple question around infrastructure is, where will that value be captured? Well, it'll be in the places where there are three companies who do this: storage, compute, and GPUs, which are really companies like Amazon, Google. Then you look at algorithms, which is how do you actually make these decisions? How do you train the human mind? How do you model the human mind? And when you look under the hood, there's, again, two companies that dominate here. If you go into GitHub, you see something called TensorFlow. Lo and behold, one company created it. Then there's another thing called CUDA. Lo and behold, another company we've already heard of has created that. The point is that all of these building blocks are now well established. A lot of the value has been created. So now what next? And what next is around applications. And this is where we get to our 2018 pick for Irisome. It's in this application layer where over the next 10 or 20 years, you're going to see most enterprise software get remade. And in that will be the reallocation of hundreds and potentially even trillions of dollars of IT spend over that entire time. So how do enterprises take advantage of AI? Well, the first thing they need to do, as we learned in the past, was organize their information. Take it and stick it into some training algorithms to create a model. But the problem is that all of this data is in a very unstructured way. It doesn't exist in a neatly organized model. There aren't labels. There aren't things that classified all of this stuff. These are Excel spreadsheets. These are Word documents. These are PowerPoint decks. And so you need an organizing layer who can take all of that chaos and create some sanity out of it. And there is. And so we get to our 2018 pick for Irisome, which is Box. So why Box? For a bunch of reasons. The first and foremost is that they sit on top of an enormous amount of R&D that these huge internet giants are already doing. In fact, when you look under the hood of how much money is being spent, last year alone, almost $45 billion. And these guys benefit from this enormous tailwind. And they do three very simple basic applications with all of this infrastructure that has been built for them. They give companies the ability to add intelligence to imagery, to audio, and to video. And so what does that mean to do that? Well, imagine now you go into a hospital and millions of x-rays have already been pre-classified. They know what the difference between a malignant and a non-malignant tumor are. They know what's a nodule versus a tumor. They can tell you very discreetly what's a blockage and what's not. Those are machines trained to make these decisions with the participation of great doctors. Imagine now you call and get an insurance policy. And instead of weeks, what happens is you actually apply over the phone. All of that is automatically created, an application that's translated into a computer. A decision is made and your policy is created. So you take audio and all of a sudden it exists in contextualized, structured data. Or imagine the ability to actually take any running video, identify people, identify themes, things that have been said, anomalies, and you see how there's just a wide number of ways in which we believe Box can generate an enormous amount of value over the next few years. So as always, let's look at our work. There's really three ways in which great companies, in my perspective, get built. The first is you find a core product that works, then you use that trust to build the ability to expand to adjacent verticals, and then you drive features that drive your average revenue. And Box is doing all three very quietly, unbeknownst to most people. This is a company with 82,000 enterprise customers, with almost 70% of the Fortune 500. Companies that we all know of, trust and respect, use Box every day. And they use them for a very obvious set of features that has created trust, repeatable purchase behavior, very low churn, and high value. In fact, there are now more than 10 million users using this product, paying in the enterprise, which when you compare them to other companies, sets the stage for what could be an enormous business being built almost quietly under our noses. It is also a business that has almost $550 million of recurring revenue and has been steadily, consistently growing this revenue for years and years and years. And it is also a business at this point that is now meaningfully free cash flow positive and generating real amounts of cash that they can re-inject into the business. So the core business is unbelievably stable, highly predictable, and frankly, what we're going to see in a little bit, very cheap. And on top of this, what they've been able to do is build a whole suite of value-added services. In fact, over the last 3 years, they've started to really understand how to upsell and cross-sell. And last quarter, what they told us was over 2/3 of their deals over 100K actually involved these value-added upsells. And then now we get to the AI layer, which is the stage has been set for a great product with a great customer base who are now ready to adopt all the AI capabilities that these enormous companies have now created and made available through the interface layer of organizations like Box. And what's great about this is it builds off of momentum in their core business, The amount of volume of data that's inside this business that they can organize is just exploding. This is a new business stream that, when they land customers, comes in at more than 90% gross margin. But it's a business that is incredibly cheap and undervalued. In fact, when you look at the market cap of this business relative to others, what you see is a really cheap company with incredibly low churn and an unbelievable margin of safety. And so when you layer this AI-led digital transformation, what we think is going to happen is very similar to the last decade. We're going to see, on average, 20 to 25% compounding in their revenue. We're going to see an expansion of all of these verticals. We're going to see an expansion of ARPU driving value-added services. And we think we're going to see even a modest multiple expansion over the next 5 to 10 years. And when that happens, what you see is a business that can be extremely valuable. So to recap, our pick for 2018 is Box. If you believe and if you care about artificial intelligence and its role in the world and your ability as a public market investor, what I would tell you is be long Amazon, be long Google, but frankly, be long Box. Thanks, everybody.